As many of you may already know, the Minecraft soundtrack was written by a German musician named Daniel Rosenfeld, otherwise known as C418. Now, 2021, later this year, is actually the 10th anniversary of the release of the original Minecraft game. But I just wanted to look at a couple of the most popular, for me, some of the most recognizable tunes from the soundtrack and talk a little bit about their makeup and how their simplicity and subjectivity makes them so usable in the soundtrack. And maybe that's not the right word. I basically just mean, like, they don't seem to get old. You can kind of listen to them for a very extended period of time. Now, a lot of that certainly maybe comes down to the instrumentation choice, but some of it certainly comes down to the actual composition. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, I know a bunch of you are going to point out all of your favorite Minecraft tunes. Please do that in the comments below because we're not going to talk about very many of them. But if you want me to cover more of the songs from Minecraft, feel free to let me know which ones you want to hear about in the comments down below. Now, the first song that we're going to talk about from the soundtrack is simply Minecraft, the Minecraft song. It's actually listed as Minecraft on the soundtrack. You all certainly know it. It's the iconic digital piano sound, just playing a few simple chords. And that sounds like this. So the first thing that's unique to me about this is that we're pretty obviously in the key of G flat. But we don't ever actually use G flat as our root or our bass note. We spend the entirety of this piece on either the minor 6 chord or the 1 chord over the 5. And what I mean by that is it is G flat. It is the G flat chord. However, the bottom note that we keep returning to is not G flat. It's actually D flat, which of course in the key of G flat, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 5th. So we are constantly coming back to this 1 chord, but we're playing that chord over the 5. I find that really interesting because it gives you this feeling of like, well, we're settled, but we're never fully home. And what that allows it to do is it can go on and on and on and on, and we never hit a point where we feel like the whole song has resolved. That is particularly relevant for its usage because obviously you want things that are able to flow into one another or perhaps loop. When we talked about the Wii music a few weeks ago, we talked about that exact phenomenon where the music was written specifically so that it would loop back around to the beginning without much of really an indication of being fully finished. This is what you might call a vamp. A vamp is simply a small phrase that gets played over and over and over and over again, and then other things either over top of it or surrounding it are happening all the time. Vamps are incredibly useful. We use them a ton in jazz. In fact, one of the most popular jazz vamps ever is at the beginning or the end of All the Things You Are. But oftentimes at the beginning and the end, we play this little vamp that goes like this. So that's basically what a vamp is. It's just a small repeated phrase that we use to sit underneath other things happening. That's in many ways how I think this is sort of used. Once we start hearing the rest of the instruments, we sort of realize what the chord structure of this actually is. To me, it kind of seems like it starts on an E flat minor sound. If you just look at the electric piano sound, it's still playing for that first phrase. Once other instruments and the strings start to come in, it's pretty clear that we're sort of using this sound and the actual chord progression, or the vamp, if you will, in its entirety is really just going back and forth between that E flat to G flat, but remember, we're using that the fifth of G flat, which is D flat, or that's what we're using in the bass. So this vamp provides us with a very open-ended sound basis which we can work off of. And that's exactly what the strings do with some of the melodies that come in. It's really just a very calming, very minimal sound with 2 chords. Now, for a more sort of in-depth look at how this relates to the gameplay, there's actually a really fantastic video by a creator named Meraki that I will link to down below, and he talks about all of the ways that the vibe of the music directly relates to the particular type of gameplay that we might be experiencing in that moment.
The ambience created by the strings give a sense of loneliness, and the piano feels almost like footsteps wandering through that vast emptiness. And if you think about it, that perfectly embodies what playing Minecraft alone is like.
So rather than me kind of going into some of those details, I'm just going to point you in the direction of that video because it was so well made. One interesting thing to point out about this is I would say that although we are in the key center overall of G flat major, we actually don't really use the G flat major scale in any way, shape, or form. And the whole thing really just sits on the G flat pentatonic scale. 5 notes. Now, it may seem like there is more going on within the song, but a lot of that is just because of some of the different layering of the instruments and some of the movements within those instruments, because I want you to hear something very, very interesting here. I'm gonna play a little bit of this, and as I go along, I'm gonna start to put in other notes from the G flat major overall sound. So we might be talking about some F naturals, or B naturals. You're very quickly going to realize why I'm saying that this is all in G flat pentatonic, because even though technically, if you're talking about E flat minor, if we were to extend E flat minor out, we get all kinds of interesting color tones on top of that, including F works really well in there, C works really well in there, over this E flat minor sound. So one might assume reasonably that, okay, well, if we want to expand on this and include lots of different color tones, maybe that F and maybe that C might work really well. But watch this. We might be able to make that sound really beautiful, but it doesn't really fit in the original soundtrack. It just doesn't work when we listen to the original recording. Now, certainly I can sit here and I can play a rendition of it and use all kinds of different things and make it sound fine, but it was never really intended to have those sounds. It's pretty much purely just a G flat major pentatonic sound. So theoretically, you could play and do whatever you want on just all of the black notes on the piano. And it's gonna sound pretty nice. So if you ever wanna mess around with that particular song, that's a very easy way to do it, so go try that. The other tune I want to talk about is Sweden, which again is one of the most popular ever in the Minecraft soundtrack. Really just a gorgeous sequence of chords. So simple, yet every note is just really correctly chosen, I feel. Really quickly, let's just go over what the chord progression is. So this is in the key of D major, and the first thing we're gonna do is we actually start on the minor 2. We climb up. This is just, don't consider this a chord. I would consider this more of a passing note, meaning we're not on it for long enough to bother defining exactly what it is. We're just using it as a note to get us from one bass note to the next. Now, this chord, this is a G major 7 chord, but it's constructed with the 9th in the chord, and then 5 and major 7. Now, what's really interesting about chords like this is they are so simple, yet they're so formulaic that you can come up with ways to think about them so that you can pull these chords out and use them in any different context. Here's a very simple way to look at this one. Yes, this is a G major 7 with the 9. You might call, I don't know, would you call it G major 7 add 9, I guess? That would be, is that correct? Something like that? But here's a simpler way to put it. Play a D major chord. So this technically would be D first inversion, second inversion. So D second inversion with a G in the bass. That's it. Now, would that work if it wasn't second inversion? Of course. It'll work with any of the inversions, right? So how do we broaden that to make it applicable to any key no matter what? Well, D is what of G? Because if the chord is G, all right, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay? So we are taking the chord built on the 5th of G. So 5 over 1, that's the chord. Now, let's apply that to a different key. How about key of A? Well, what's 5 in the key of A? It's E, so let's play an E chord. Now what are we gonna do? It's 5 over 1. We're just gonna put the 1 in the bass. Look at that. It's beautiful. Now, technically, what is that? Well, that's an A major 7 add 9. But we don't even need to necessarily always think about that. We can come up with these little formulas to help us play chords just off the cuff. How about in the key of C? Well, the 5th of C is G, so we're gonna play a G over C. Beautiful. E flat, A flat, B. When you come up with these different little formulas to play chords, it makes them so much easier. At least in my experience, and maybe you feel differently. Maybe you're more used to just reading the entire chord symbol all on your own. But in terms of having quick voicings that you've practiced that you can pull out and play very quickly, I find that very helpful. So back to Sweden, we started on the minor 2. There's our 4 chord, which our voicing is 5 over 1. Another passing tone. Now this one's really interesting because we're getting to a point where there's an A in the bass, but this is not an A chord. To me, this is an F sharp minor chord. Just with an A in the bass. And now we have another passing tone in the bass before we finally land on the 1. 2, 4, 3, resolve to the 1. And again, this functions as a vamp. And like the Minecraft title track, we hear it used, other instruments come in and start playing some other things, and eventually we even shift the instrumentation entirely and use a pizzicato string section to play the same figure. But vamp, I think is a fair way to classify it. Now, this is really interesting because when I was listening to this and I was thinking about, what does this remind me of? What does this sound like? Check this out. So for those of you who may not have recognized it, that is a tune written by the great jazz pianist Bill Evans, and it's called Peace, Peace, and you can see why. But as I was listening to Sweden, I was struck by the similarity in the application and in the actual, just what it sounds like even. They both use a vamp, they both allow other things to kind of float over the top of that vamp, they both have almost the exact same tempo, almost the exact same sort of feel. It's really just an example of like the effectiveness of using these very minimal, low energy, peaceful vamps. There's so much more to go over in the Minecraft soundtrack, but it's just, I feel it is very unique and so well written, especially given its restraint. I mean, it very easily could have gone a whole different direction and filled up the sound with orchestral sounds or even just like, more notes, and it just didn't. Daniel Rosenfeld did an incredible job writing these tracks, and it's no surprise that they are so iconic and that they are loved so widely. And it just goes to show that you don't need tons of notes and chords and all kinds of different musical complexities. In fact, sometimes the more simple something is, the more memorable we find it. Anyways, that's just a brief look inside of a couple of the Minecraft tunes. And if you'd like to see more, please let me know in the comments below which tunes you would like me to break down or which ones you'd like me to play a little bit of, and I'd be happy to take a look at what you guys are interested in. All right, that's it. That's gonna do it. And so once again, let me know what other things you'd like me to cover from the Minecraft soundtrack in the comments down below. Maybe we'll do some on the YouTube channel. Maybe we'll do some over on Nebula. And regardless, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.